The wind coming off the Baltic carried a cold that cut straight through clothing, a sharp April chill that made every breath sting. In the crowded harbor at Neustadt, the SS Thielbek rocked gently against the pier, its hull blackened with age and wartime wear. The ship had carried cargo for most of the war, but on this day, in 1945, it held something far heavier. Hundreds of prisoners, men, women, and teenagers pulled from Neuengamme and its sub-camps, were herded up the gangway under the eyes of guards who barked orders and tightened their grips on their rifles. The prisoners moved slowly, bones showing through striped uniforms, legs trembling from starvation and disease. Many didn't understand why they were being loaded onto ships at the very moment Germany's surrender was days away. They only knew that resistance meant a rifle butt in the ribs or a shout that made already frightened crowds panic. Inside the Thielbek's lower holds, the air turned thick almost immediately. The space had been meant for coal and machinery, not human beings. The guards sealed the hatch after forcing the prisoners down the ladders, locking them into darkness, broken only by a few thin beams of daylight slipping through cracks in the metal. The sound of the hatch closing, a heavy mechanical slam, rolled through the hold like a final judgment. People pressed shoulder to shoulder in the cramped space, trying to carve out a pocket to breathe. Some whispered prayers. Others cried quietly. Most simply waited, too weak to stand for long, folding onto the iron floor and leaning against strangers for support. The Thielbek sat docked beside two other ships, the Cap Arcona and the Athen, creating a cluster of vessels crowded with prisoners the SS had moved from camp to camp as the Allies approached. Official records would later claim they were meant for prisoner exchanges, but survivors insisted the truth was darker. The ships were floating prisons, meant to hide evidence of the camps, or to be sunk deliberately before liberation. No one on board knew which version was real. They only knew the fear that sat in their stomachs like a stone. On May 3rd, British reconnaissance pilots spotted the ships from above. The Baltic coastline was a blur of retreating German forces, SS units discarding uniforms, and rumors of last-minute executions. From the air, the cluster of vessels looked like military transports preparing for escape. The pilots had no idea that thousands of prisoners were sealed inside their holds. They saw German ships. That was enough. Shortly after noon, the air hummed with the approach of Tempest and Typhoon fighters. Prisoners in the Thielbek's hold heard the engines before they heard the bombs. The first explosion struck the Cap Arcona, sending a rolling concussion across the harbor. Dust and rust flakes rained down inside the Thielbek, and panic erupted instantly. People clawed at the walls, shouting for help, banging on the metal with fists and pieces of broken wood. The guards on deck did nothing. Some fled, some took cover, none opened the hatches. More bombs fell, this time hitting the water near the Thielbek, shaking the ship violently. The lights flickered, pipes rattled overhead. Prisoners were thrown to the ground. Screams filled the darkness. Then a blast slammed into the side of the hull, ripping open steel plates and throwing men and women against the far wall. Water sprayed into the hold through a jagged tear, cold and fast. The ship began to list immediately, tilting toward the port side as seawater surged through the opening. Those near the breach tried to scramble away, but there was nowhere to go. The hold filled with the sound of rushing water, a steady roar that drowned out everything else. People clung to anything bolted to the ship, pipes, beams, iron supports, trying to keep themselves above the rising flood. The water was freezing, numbing legs within seconds, dragging bodies down as its level climbed. Those who couldn't swim had no chance at all. The guards abandoned the deck. Some jumped into lifeboats. Others dove into the water and swam for shore. No orders were given to release the prisoners. No attempt was made to open the hatches. The men and women trapped below heard the sounds of footsteps vanish overhead, replaced by the distant roar of planes making another pass. As the Thielbek continued to list, water poured in faster. People formed chains, hoisting one another toward the ladders that led to the sealed hatch. They beat on it with fists until their knuckles split, screaming through the small vents for someone to open it. No one answered. Outside, fire spread along the ship as oil on the surface ignited from the bombing, sending smoke into the sky. Inside, air grew thick with the smell of iron and bodies pressed together in terror. The water rose past knees, then waists, then shoulders. Some tried to tread in place. Others pushed toward higher beams, climbing on anything that rose above the surface, but the ship was sinking too fast. Darkness dipped underwater. The last pockets of air disappeared. The cries faded into muffled gasps as the hold became a tomb. The Thielbek slipped beneath the surface within minutes, taking thousands with her. When she finally came to rest on the sandy floor of the Baltic, bodies floated in the flooded compartments, tangled together in the same stillness that had once consumed them in the camps. The Cap Arcona burned nearby, turning the sea into a field of smoke and floating debris. In the chaotic aftermath of the war, the sinking of the Thielbek received little attention. The world was overwhelmed with liberation, evidence of atrocities, and the collapse of the Nazi regime. Many of the prisoners aboard the ship had never been registered properly in the camps. Their identities weren't fully recorded. Some families didn't even know their loved ones had been moved to the Baltic in the first place. Without records, the dead remained nameless, lost in the layers of wartime confusion. It wasn't until decades later that the story of the Thielbek began to be told with clarity. Divers reached the wreck and described the eerie scenes inside. Rusted beams, collapsed compartments, and the remnants of what had been a human cargo pressed into the ship's hull. Memorials were built. Names were researched. Families learned, sometimes for the first time, where their relatives had taken their final breaths. But the recognition came late, long after the water had claimed its dead, and long after silence had settled over the Baltic like a final shroud. The Thielbek still rests beneath the waves, a grave for thousands who were trapped not by the enemy they feared, but by the chaos and brutality of the world collapsing around them. Thank you for listening to The Sunken Ledger. Subscribe for more true stories from the depths.